The air in the Nether Citadel did not smell like air. It smelled of ozone, ancient sulfur, and the sterile metallic tang of recycled atmosphere that had been scrubbed one too many times by Magitech filters. It was a heavy scent, one that coated the back of the throat and tasted like a thunderstorm that refused to break. Adrian Cade adjusted his grip on the sonic scrubber, wincing as a phantom cramp shot through his left leg. The leg was not there, of course. It had been gone for 6 years, replaced by a bioalloy prosthetic that cost more than his parents' entire lifetime earnings. Yet the ghost of the limb still remembered the damp cold of the trenches. He ignored it. Ignoring pain was a skill he had perfected long before he had become a janitor in the heart of the enemy capital. Sector 9 Corridor of Ancestors. Maintenance complete, Adrian muttered into his collar comms unit, his voice rough from disuse. Moving to thermal ventilation check. Acknowledged, Unit 4-1. The automated voice of the central dispatch crackled back. Do not engage with locals. Eyes down. Shift ends in 2 hours. Adrian clicked the channel off. Do not engage with locals. It was the first rule of the treaty. It was also the easiest to follow, considering the locals were 7-foot-tall demons, with obsidian skin, burning magma veins, and a cultural predisposition to view humans as hairless, fragile mistakes of evolution. He pushed the heavy cleaning cart forward. The wheels rumbled softly over the floor, which was made of polished black glass, volcanic obsidian, fused by magic so strong it could withstand orbital bombardment. 5 years ago, Adrian had been the one looking at maps of this very floor, calculating the yield required to crack it. Now, he was the one making sure it did not have dust on it. Life had a funny sense of humor. Adrian was 36 years old. He had the tired eyes of a man of 50 and the bank account of a teenager. The scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline tugged as he frowned, a souvenir from a piece of shrapnel delivered by his own side's artillery. That was what happened when you were a strategist for the Human Alliance, and you refused a direct order to incinerate a civilian block. They stripped your rank, they stripped your pension, and they left you to rot. But the Demon Empire paid in refined ether gold, and ether gold converted to Earth currency at a rate that could get his sister Maya out of the slums of old Chicago and into a biodome within 3 years. For Maya, he would scrub toilets in hell, which effectively he was doing. He stopped the cart to let a patrol pass. Adrian pressed his back against the cold wall, lowering his gaze to the floor. He made himself small. He made himself bored. 3 members of the Crimson Guard strode past. They were magnificent and terrifying. Their armor was not forged, but grown from living metal, shifting like oil over their massive frames. They did not walk. They stalked. But it was not the sound of their boots that made Adrian grit his teeth. It was the noise in his head, the Shadow Link. To the demons, the Shadow Link was a gift, a collective psionic web that connected their species, allowing them to share emotions, instincts, and tactical awareness. It was a pack mind that made them the most efficient warriors in the galaxy. To humans who lacked the biological receivers to process it, the Shadow Link was a defect in the airwaves. It was a constant, low-frequency buzzing at the base of the skull. It was the sound of 1,000,000 distinct emotions compressed into white noise. It felt like standing under a high-voltage power line while having a migraine. It was a reminder every second of every day that he did not belong here, that he was a singular, lonely prey animal in a world of apex predators. The buzz spiked as the guards passed a wave of aggression and alertness, washing over Adrian's latent senses. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat and waited until their heavy footsteps faded. Just 2 more hours, he whispered to himself. 2 hours, then back to the habitat pod. Earplugs, whiskey, sleep. He pushed off the wall and turned the cart toward the service lift. He was not technically supposed to be in the West Spire today. The maintenance log said the thermal vents needed checking, but Adrian had forged that log entry 3 days ago. He needed the roof. The west spire was the highest point of the nether citadel, piercing the smog layer of the planet Nereth. The air up there was thin, freezing, and dangerous. But because it was so high and so far from the populated barracks, the shadow link signal was weak. It was the only place in the entire fortress where the buzzing in his head quieted down to a dull hum. It was his secret sanctuary. The service lift groaned as it climbed, passing floor after floor of the Royal War Nursery. This entire spire was dedicated to the upbringing of the demon elite. Below him, hundreds of royal and noble children were being trained in the arts of combat and sorcery. Adrian tried not to think about it. He had seen what demon children looked like after a human bombardment. He had also seen what human soldiers looked like after a demon child panicked and unleashed a wildfire spell. The lift chimed. Roof access, maintenance only. Adrian stepped out into the biting wind. The view was apocalyptic and beautiful. Below, the red light of the lava chasms cast a bloody glow over the spiked architecture of the citadel. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with the contrails of patrol ships. The wind whipped at his gray jumpsuit, instantly chilling the sweat on his back. He shivered, but he smiled. The noise in his head dropped by 50%. He could hear his own thoughts again. He dragged his toolkit over to a cluster of massive heat exchange pipes. They radiated a steady industrial warmth. It was his favorite spot, tucked away behind the main ventilation turbine, invisible to the security drones, unless they did a deep thermal scan. Adrian sat down, leaning his back against the warm metal pipes. He stretched out his legs. His biological leg ached from the standing. His prosthetic leg just felt heavy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a nutrient bar. It was wrapped in silver foil and labeled protein mass, flavor neutral. Dining like a Kincaid, he murmured, tearing the wrapper with his teeth. It tasted like compressed cardboard and sawdust. He chewed slowly, letting his eyes close. The warmth of the pipes seeped into his spine. The wind howled outside his little shelter, but here it was cozy. The shadow link was just a distant murmur, like the sound of the ocean far away. He did not mean to fall asleep. It was a dangerous thing to do. If he was caught sleeping on the job, it was a breach of contract. If he was caught sleeping in a restricted zone, it was imprisonment. But the exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on his eyelids. Just 5 minutes. He would just rest his eyes for 5 minutes. Adrian's breathing slowed. The half-eaten nutrient bar slipped from his fingers. His head lolled back against the pipes. The darkness took him. He did not know how long he slept. He woke up, slowly pulled from unconsciousness, not by a sound, but by a sensation. Heat. Heavy, solid heat. And silence. That was what startled him the most. The buzzing in his head, the constant grinding static of the shadow link that had been his companion for 3 years, was gone. It was not just quiet. It was tranquil. It felt like sinking into a warm bath after a week of marching in freezing mud. There was a rhythmic, soothing pulse echoing in his mind, a slow thump, 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 thump that felt like a lullaby. Adrian blinked, his brain foggy. Why did he feel so safe? He was a human in a demon fortress. He should be terrified. He tried to move his legs, but he couldn't. He was pinned. Panic spiked sharp and cold, but the soothing rhythm in his head washed over it, smothering the fear before it could scream. Safe. Warm. Nest. The alien thoughts drifted through his mind, not in words, but in pure concepts. Adrian looked down. His breath hitched in his throat and simply refused to come out. Sprawled across his lap, using his thighs as a pillow, was a monster. Or more accurately, a royal demon in a state of semi-transformation. She was massive. Even curled up, she took up all the space between him and the next pipe. Her skin was the color of midnight, absorbing the dim light, rather than reflecting it. Her hair, a cascade of ink-black waves, spilled over his knees and pooled on the floor. But it was the non-human features that made Adrian freeze. 2 large curved horns, seemingly carved from obsidian and inlaid with gold filigree, swept back from her forehead. A long, thick tail covered in scales that shimmered with an iridescent violet sheen was wrapped possessively around Adrian's waist, the spade-shaped tip resting lazily against his stomach. She was wearing the ceremonial armor of a high general black plate with crimson trim, but the chest piece was unclasped and hanging loose, revealing the black silk undertunic. Her pauldrons were discarded on the floor. It was General Princess Arya Nightflare, the scourge of the Southern Front, the daughter of the Demon Queen, and she was drooling slightly on his maintenance jumpsuit. Adrian's mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but his body remained completely paralyzed. This was it. This was how he died. He had touched a royal. No worse. A royal was touching him. In demon culture, sleep was a sacred vulnerability. To sleep near someone was the ultimate sign of trust. To sleep on someone was a declaration of ownership. The princess shifted. A low, rumbling purr vibrated through her chest and straight into Adrian's femur. She nuzzled her face deeper into his stomach, her horns scraping harmlessly against the fabric of his jacket. Soft. Mine. Quiet. The alien thoughts drifted into his head again. Adrian realized with dawning horror why the shadow link was quiet. It was her. Her presence was drowning out the static. She was a broadcast tower of calm, and he was the antenna she had decided to plug into. "Oh, God," Adrian whispered, the sound barely audible over the wind. He looked at her hands. They were resting on his chest. Her fingers were long-tipped with razor-sharp retractable claws that were currently sheathed. If she woke up and realized she was cuddling the janitor, those claws would open him up from navel to neck before he could blink. He had to move. He had to slide out from under her, run to the lift, and pretend he was never here. He reached down, his trembling hand hovering over her shoulder. "Don't wake the dragon," his instincts screamed. "But if the queen finds you, you're dead," his logic screamed back. He gently, ever so gently touched her shoulder. Your Highness." She grumbled a sound like grinding stones and tightened her tail around his waist. The grip was strong enough to bruise. She did not wake up. She simply pulled him closer, treating him like a favorite stuffed animal that was trying to fall off the bed. "Warm. Stay." The command in his head was absolute. Adrian leaned his head back against the pipe and stared at the purple sky. Okay. Think Cade. Strategize." There was no strategy for this. The tactical manual for Demon Princess Nap Attack had not been written. Suddenly, the soothing rhythm in his head shattered. The air pressure on the roof dropped. The door to the stairwell 20 meters away did not just open, it disintegrated. A blast of violet fire blew the heavy blast doors off their hinges, sending metal skidding across the roof. Adrian flinched instinctively, bringing his hands up to cover his face, but he couldn't curl into a ball because he was currently acting as a mattress for royalty. Through the smoke and sparks, a silhouette emerged. It was tall, terrifying, and radiating enough magical energy to make Adrian's teeth ache. Queen Seraphina Nyx. She was flanked by 6 members of the Royal Obsidian Guard, their weapons glaives tipped with crackling plasma, leveled directly at Adrian's face. Beside the queen stood a figure Adrian recognized from the news feeds, Chancellor Varengar. The demon looked like a vulture made of shadows, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with green malice. The queen's eyes were not burning. They were voids, 2 endless pools of darkness that promised eternal suffering. She looked at Adrian. She looked at her daughter curled up and snoring softly on his lap. She looked back at Adrian. The silence that stretched between them was heavier than the planet itself. Then the queen inhaled. The heat vents around them flared. The citadel seemed to shudder on its foundations. "Who let my general daughter nap on your lap as her territory human?" The voice did not just hit his ears, it hit his bones. It was a physical force that rattled his ribcage. The princess stirred on his lap. She frowned, tightening her grip on his waist, clearly annoyed by the noise, but she did not wake. She just buried her face deeper into his jacket to block out her mother's voice. Adrian looked at the guards. He looked at the Queen. He looked at the Chancellor, who was already muttering a spell that looked suspiciously like flay skin from bone. Slowly, very slowly, Adrian raised his hands in the universal gesture of surrender. He kept his voice low, steady, and infused with the dry, suicidal humor that had been his only coping mechanism for the last decade. "For the record, Your Majesty," Adrian said, his voice cracking only slightly. "I was the furniture," Chancellor Varangar hissed, stepping forward. His robes swirled around him like living smoke. "He mocks the crown. He has ensnared the princess with human trickery. Look at him, filthy broken debris touching the blood royal." "He is touching her," Queen Seraphina said, her voice dropping from a scream to a lethal whisper. "But more importantly, Varangar is touching him." The Queen took a step forward, her heels clicking on the metal roof. The guards tensed, waiting for the order to strike. "Arya has not slept more than 2 hours a night for 5 years, Seraphina said, her gaze fixed on her daughter's peaceful face. "The Shadow Link screams in her blood. She is a warrior bred for a war that ended, and she cannot silence the noise." The Queen pointed a clawed finger at Adrian. "Why is she silent now, human? What spell have you cast?" "No spell, ma'am," Adrian said, trying to ignore the spear tip, hovering 3 inches from his left eye. "I came up here to eat my lunch. I fell asleep. I woke up encumbered." "Lies!" Varangar shrieked. "He is an assassin. He is using dampening tech to confuse her senses, so he can slit her throat." "If I wanted to kill her," Adrian pointed out reasonably, "I probably would have done it before the entire royal guard showed up. Also, I have a plastic spoon in my pocket. It is not exactly a weapon of mass destruction." "Silence." Varangar raised his hand, green energy gathering in his palm. "I will purge his mind and strip the truth from his corpse." "Wait!" The command came from the Queen. She held up a hand, stopping the Chancellor. She cocked her head, listening to something only she could hear: the Shadow Link. She looked at Adrian with a new expression. It was not mercy. It was confusing. And for a being as ancient and powerful as Seraphina, confusion was a rare and dangerous thing. "The link is quiet around him," she murmured. "It is not suppressed. It is settled." She looked at Adrian's leg, the biomechanical one. Then she looked at the scar on his face. "You are Sector 9 maintenance," she stated. "Yes, Your Majesty. You are the one who cleans the ancestral hall. I will try my best. And yet you sit here with the future of the Demon Empire using you as a body pillow, and you do not smell of fear. You smell of—" she sniffed the air delicately. "Exhaustion and cheap synthetic protein." "The protein is very cheap, yes." Queen Seraphina straightened up. The fire in her hair dimmed slightly. "Guards, seize him." "Your Majesty," Varangar protested. "He must be executed immediately. The sanctity of the royal person." "I said seize him, not kill him," Seraphina snapped. "Arya has claimed him as territory. If we kill him while she is in deep sleep and connected to his biorhythm, the psychic backlash could shatter her mind." 2 guards stepped forward. One grabbed Adrian's left arm, the other his right. Gentlemen," Adrian whispered urgently. "She is still holding on to me. If you pull, she is going to wake up grumpy." "We will risk it," the guard growled. They yanked him upward. The effect was instantaneous. As soon as Adrian was pulled from Arya's grip, the silence shattered. Princess Arya let out a snarl that sounded like a jet engine starting up. Her eyes snapped open, glowing vertical slits of pure gold. Her tail whipped out, cracking like a whip, and smashed into the shins of the guard holding Adrian's right arm. The guard buckled armor, screeching. Arya scrambled to her feet, crouching low, her claws extending fully. She looked wild, disoriented, and furious. She looked from her empty hands to the guards dragging Adrian away. "Mine!" she hissed. It wasn't a word. It was a guttural claim of possession. "Arya!" The Queen's voice was a command. "Stand down." The princess blinked, the golden glow in her eyes flickering. She looked at her mother, then at Adrian, who was dangling between two 7-foot giants like a rag doll. Recognition slowly dawned on her face, followed immediately by a flush of dark purple embarrassment that darkened her cheeks. She stood up straight, trying to pull her armor back together, regaining her composure with terrifying speed. "Mother, Chancellor, I appear to have—" "Did you fall asleep on the janitor?" Varangar supplied helpfully, his voice dripping with venom. "I was conducting a security test," Arya lied smoothly, though her tail was twitching agitatedly behind her. "Investigating a potential breach in the perimeter." "By drooling on it," Adrian muttered. One of the guards cuffed him on the back of the head. Adrian saw stars. "Take him to the obsidian cells," Queen Seraphina ordered. "Chancellor Varangar, prepare the ancestral lenses. I want to know exactly what this human is. I want to know why my daughter, who has not slept without nightmares since the Battle of the Red Ash, chose him as her sanctuary." "As you command." Varangar bowed, but his eyes promised pain. The guards began to drag Adrian toward the stairs. His prosthetic leg scraped against the metal roof. As he was hauled past the princess, Adrian caught her eye. She was not looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with something far more unsettling. She looked bereft, like someone who had just had a warm blanket ripped off them in a blizzard. "Wait," Arya said. The guards paused. Arya stepped close to Adrian. She towered over him with a good head. She leaned in, sniffing his collar, the scent of ozone and cheap soap. "You smell like static," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Why are you quiet?" "I'm just a janitor, princess," Adrian replied, his voice tired. "I'm nobody," Arya pulled back. Her face hardened into the mask of the general. "We shall see." "Move." The guard shoved Adrian forward. As they dragged him into the darkness of the stairwell, leaving the wind and the light behind, Adrian let out a long sigh. He thought about the 150 credits he was supposed to transfer to Maya tomorrow. He thought about the rent due on his pod. He thought about the fact that he was definitely going to be fired. Well, Adrian thought as the heavy doors slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate. At least I won't have to clean the toilets tomorrow. The transition from the roof to the dungeon was a blur of teleportation circles and rough handling. The obsidian cells were located deep within the bedrock of the floating island, directly above the magma core. It was hot down here, oppressively hot. They threw him into a cell that was basically a box carved out of volcanic glass. No bed, no window, just a force field shimmering across the front. Adrian sat on the floor, leaning his back against the wall. He detached his prosthetic leg, it was chafing badly after the rough treatment, and set it beside him. He rubbed the stump of his thigh, grimacing. He was in deep trouble. Chancellor Varangar was a classic archetype. Adrian had met men like him in the Human Alliance too. Men who profited from war, who built their power on fear and hatred. Varangar wanted a restart of hostilities. A human, corrupting, the princess, was the perfect casus belli. Adrian closed his eyes. The shadow link was louder down here, amplified by the rock. The buzzing was intense. Die, intruder, filth, spy. The thoughts of the guards outside were leaking into his head. He pressed his palms against his temples. He missed the roof. He missed the cold. And God help him, he missed the silence of the princess. It had been the first time in 5 years that he hadn't felt alone. "Don't go there, Cade," he warned himself aloud. "She's a general of the Empire. She's killed more people than you've met. She's the enemy." But he remembered the weight of her head on his chest. He remembered the way her tail had wrapped around him, not to crush, but to hold. He looked at his hands. They were calloused, stained with cleaning fluid. "I was the furniture," he repeated into the darkness. But as he sat there waiting for the torture or the execution that was surely coming, Adrian Cade had a sinking feeling that his days of being invisible were over. The furniture had just become the most important piece on the board. The obsidian cell was not just a cage. It was an oven, designed to slow-cook the will out of a living thing. Adrian Cade sat on the floor with his back against the black glass wall, his prosthetic leg detached and resting beside him like a discarded piece of machinery. The heat radiating from the magma flows deep beneath the nether citadel, seeped through the stone, making the air shimmer. It was oppressive heavy, and tasted of sulfur and ancient dust. He closed his eyes, trying to regulate his breathing. In the silence of the dungeon, the shadow link was a dull, throbbing headache behind his eyes. It was weaker here than on the surface, dampened by miles of density-enhanced rock, but it was still there. It was always there. A reminder that he was an alien, the invader, the prey. His mind drifted as it often did when he was cornered to the day his life had ended. It was 5 years ago. He had been a decorated strategist, standing in the command center of the Human Alliance frigate, the Dauntless. The holographic map showed a civilian sector of the Demon Outer Rim, a settlement of non-combatants, mostly hatchlings, and the elderly. The order had come down from High Marshal Tiber Holt. Saturation bombardment. 100% casualty rate expected. Burn it all. Adrian remembered the coldness of the metal table under his fingers. He remembered looking at the heat signatures on the map, thousands of them small and huddled together. He remembered saying no. He remembered the blow to his face that had knocked him to the deck, the feeling of his own blood in his mouth, and the shrapnel from the warning shot that had taken his leg and scarred his face when the internal security team breached the bridge to arrest him. He had saved those demons. The delay he caused had allowed the evacuation ships to launch. But looking at the dark ceiling of his cell, Adrian wondered if it had mattered. He was going to die here alone on the enemy's homeworld. His stomach twisted, not from fear of death, but from a sharper, more practical panic. Today was the 26th. The transfer to the chaotic slums of Old Chicago was scheduled for tomorrow morning. If he did not authorize the payment, Maya would miss her lung treatment. The filtration systems in the slums were failing, and without the monthly dose of synthetic cleaning agents, her chest would fill with fluid within a week. "Stupid," Adrian whispered to the darkness. "You should have set up an automatic transfer." The heavy magnetic lock on the cell door hissed, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small space. Adrian opened his eyes. He reached for his leg, snapping the bioalloy limb back into the socket with a practiced click and a grimace as the neural connectors interfaced with his nerve endings. He stood up, smoothing down his grimy maintenance jumpsuit. 2 members of the Crimson Guard filled the doorway. They did not speak. They simply gestured with the tips of their magma glaives. "Right," Adrian said, his voice raspy. "Showtime." The Hall of Shards was less a courtroom and more a cathedral dedicated to the concept of judgment. The ceiling vanished into darkness, lost miles overhead. The walls were lined with statues of dead demon kings and queens, their eyes made of glowing rubies that seemed to track Adrian as he was marched down the central aisle. The floor was a mosaic of crushed gemstones, swirling in patterns that hurt the eyes if one looked too closely. At the far end of the hall stood the throne, a jagged monstrosity of raw iron and dragon bone. Queen Seraphina Nyx sat there, a figure of terrifying stillness. Her presence was a physical weight in the room, a gravity well that pulled everything toward her. To her right stood Chancellor Varengar, looking like a vulture that had just spotted a dying gazelle. His green robes billowed around him despite the lack of wind, and his eyes were fixed on Adrian with a mix of loathing and hunger. To her left stood Commander Rhea Tal, the head of the Royal Guard. She was helmetless, revealing a face that was severe and striking, marked by 3 ritual scars running down her chin. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sword, her posture rigid. And there, sitting on a smaller chair slightly behind the queen, was Princess Arya. She looked awful. The fierce, terrifying warrior who had nearly broken Adrian's ribs with her tail on the roof was gone. In her place was a young woman who looked like she hadn't slept in a decade. Her gold eyes were dull, rimmed with dark purple bruises. Her shoulders slumped. The Shadow Link was clearly screaming in her blood, denying her even a moment of peace. When Adrian entered, Arya's head snapped up. For a second, just a split second, her eyes widened and her nostrils flared, as if she had caught a scent of fresh air in a burning building. The guards shoved Adrian forward until he stood in the center of the room. Directly in front of him were 3 towering pillars of crystal, the ancestral obsidian lenses. Adrian Cade. Chancellor Varengar's voice slithered through the hall, amplified by magic, so that it sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves. Human, spy, violator of the royal person. Janitor, Adrian corrected softly. Level 3 certified. Silence, Varengar snapped. You stand before the lenses of truth. These ancient artifacts react to the intent of the soul. They do not lie. They cannot be deceived by your primitive technology. Varengar gestured to the pillars. If they turn red, you harbor malice and intent to harm. You will be executed. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression. If they turn venom green, you harbor deceit and hidden agendas. You will be executed slowly. And if they turn blue, Adrian asked, though he knew the answer. It was a rhetorical question in a rigged trial. Silver blue, Queen Seraphina corrected, her voice deep and resonant. The color of the Guardian. The color of stability and protection. It has not been seen in this hall for 300 years. The Queen leaned forward, her eyes boring into Adrian. Step into the focus, human. Let us see what darkness you hide in that fragile heart. Adrian took a breath. He looked at Rhea Tal, who was watching him with cold professional detachment. He looked at Arya, who was leaning forward, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair so hard the wood was splintering. He stepped between the 3 pillars. He expected pain. He expected a psychic invasion, a mental drill boring into his memories to rip out his secrets. He braced himself, gritting his teeth, waiting for the burning red of malice, or the sick green of a lie he didn't even know he was telling. The pillars hummed. A low, vibrating frequency rose in the air, shaking the dust from the mosaic floor. And then the light exploded. It was not red. It was not green. It was a blinding, brilliant silver blue. The light was cool, like moonlight on snow. It washed over Adrian, and for the first time since he had set foot on this planet, the headache behind his eyes vanished completely. The buzzing of the Shadow Link didn't just quiet down. It harmonized. It turned into a soft, melodic chime that rippled outward from the pillars. The effect on the room was instantaneous. The guards, who had been tense and ready to kill, lowered their weapons, their shoulders dropping, as a wave of unexpected calm hit them. Commander Rhea Tal blinked, her hand sliding off her sword hilt as the tension in her jaw unlocked. But the most dramatic reaction came from the throne. Princess Arya let out a long, shuddering breath. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she slumped into her chair, the tension leaving her body as if her strings had been cut. For the first time in 5 years, the noise in her head had stopped. Even Queen Seraphina looked stunned. The darkness that usually shrouded her form receded, leaving her looking less like a goddess of war and more like a shocked mother. "Impossible!" Varengar hissed, shielding his eyes from the purity of the light. "Broken. The lenses are broken. He is using some human jamming frequency." The light faded, settling into a steady, soft glow that surrounded Adrian like a halo. He stood there blinking, checking his hands to make sure he was still solid. "No tech," a voice called out from the side. The court mage, an elderly demon with skin like dried parchment, lowered his scanning rod. "I detect no signal, Your Majesty. No implants. No magic. The lenses are reacting to his biorhythm. His emotional baseline is unnaturally flat. He is a void in the chaos." "A void!" Varengar stepped down from the dais, his face twisting. He is a weapon. If he can silence the Shadow Link, he can control it. He can sever our connection to the pack. He is the greatest threat to the Demon Empire since the orbital cannons. Varangar turned to the Queen, his voice rising to a shriek. He must be destroyed. Tear him apart before he infects the others. Wait, Adrian said, raising a hand. I just want to point out that calming everyone down is usually considered a good thing. Die, manipulator. Varangar raised his hand, gathering a ball of green necrotic fire. Before the Queen could intervene, before Rhea could move, the side doors of the Great Hall burst open with a bang that echoed like thunder. But it wasn't an invading army. It was a stampede. Catch them! By the abyss, stop them! A nursemaid screamed from the corridor, but it was too late. A dozen small figures tore into the hall. The Shadow Brood. The children of the High Generals and the extended royal family, housed in the war nursery. They were a chaotic mix of horns, tails, and scales, ranging in age from 3 to 7 years old in human terms. They were wild, feral, and notoriously difficult to control because their immature minds were constantly bombarded by the Shadow Link, making them prone to tantrums of magical destruction. But right now, they weren't destroyed. They were hunting. They ignored the Queen. They ignored the terrifying Chancellor. They swarmed toward the center of the room, as if pulled by a magnet. Adrian barely had time to widen his eyes before the wave hit him. Human, one of them squealed. A small demon with bright red skin and oversized ears tackled Adrian's good leg, wrapping his arms and legs around the calf like a koala. Another one, a girl with tiny wings that couldn't support her weight, yet scrambled up his back and buried her face in the crook of his neck. 2 more sat on his feet. One grabbed his left hand, hugging it to his chest. Within 10 seconds, Adrian Cade, former strategist and current janitor, was completely immobilized by a pile of royal demon children. Hey, whoa. Careful with the prosthetic. Adrian tried to balance, waving his free arm. The reaction in the room was absolute silence. Then, the feeling hit them all. The Shadow Link channeled through the children who were touching Adrian shifted. The static noise that pervaded the atmosphere of the Citadel smoothed out. It became a rhythmic, warm pulse. It felt like the room itself was taking a deep breath and exhaling. The children who had been screaming and running seconds ago were now dead silent. Their eyes were drooping. The red-skinned boy on Adrian's leg yawned a sound that displayed a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth and rested his cheek against Adrian's knee. He feels quiet, the boy mumbled sleepily. The court mage stared at his readings, his hands trembling. Your Majesty, the emotional instability field of the brood has flatlined. They are completely synchronized. I have never seen stabilization this rapid. Not even with sedation. Chancellor Varangar looked at the scene with horror. To him, this wasn't heartwarming. It was a usurpation of nature. He is corrupting the youth. He is brainwashing the heirs of the Empire Guards. Kill him. Cut them off. Do not move. The shout came from Commander Rhea Tal. She stepped between Varangar and Adrian, her hand now firmly gripping her sword. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the child clinging to Adrian's neck. That is my nephew, Rhea said, her voice shaking slightly. He has not let anyone touch him without biting since his father died. Look at him. The boy was asleep. Actually asleep, drooling slightly on Adrian's collar. Queen Seraphina stood up. She descended the stairs of the dais, her movements slow and regal. She stopped 3 feet from Adrian, who was currently trying to support the weight of 6 heavy demon children without falling over. The Queen looked at the silver-blue light of the lenses, still glowing softly around them. She looked at Varangar, who was fuming but cowed by her proximity. Finally, she looked at her daughter. Arya had walked down as well. She stood just outside the circle of light, looking at Adrian with an expression of intense longing. She wasn't looking at him like a lover. She was looking at him like a starving woman looking at a banquet. Varangar is right about one thing, Seraphina said, her voice cool and carrying to every corner of the hall. This human is dangerous. A being who can nullify the shadow link simply by existing is a strategic anomaly. Then let me execute him, Varangar pleaded. Or send him back to the Alliance in a box. However, Serafina continued ignoring the Chancellor. We have a problem, Chancellor. The shadow link is growing stronger every year. Our warriors are burning out. My own daughter is on the brink of madness from sleep deprivation. And our children and our future are growing up in a constant state of sensory overload. She reached out and gently touched the cheek of the child sleeping on Adrian's shoulder. The boy didn't stir. 12 shadow mages could not calm this group in under an hour, Serafina murmured. This human did it in 10 seconds without casting a single spell. She looked Adrian in the eye. Who are you, Adrian Cade? I'm just a guy who wants to get paid, Your Majesty, Adrian said honestly. And my leg is starting to cramp. A small smile, barely visible, touched the Queen's lips. It was terrifying. I will not kill you, Serafina announced. A collective gasp went through the court. And I will not send you back, she continued. I am confiscating you. Confiscating me, Adrian blinked. Like contraband. Like a resource, Serafina said. She turned to Arya. General Arya. Arya snapped to attention, though her eyes kept drifting back to Adrian. Yes, Mother. You need sleep. The brood needs stability. This human seems to be the only effective sedative on the planet. Serafina gestured to Adrian. I am assigning him to you. To me, Arya's voice squeaked slightly. Mother, you cannot just throw a human at me. He is fragile, he is the enemy. He is a pillow that breathes, Serafina countered smoothly. You have not slept a full night in 5 years. Today on the roof you slept. If his thigh helps you not go insane, I will rent both of his thighs, and the rest of him is attached to them. Your Majesty, Adrian interrupted, panic rising. With all due respect, I am a trained engineer, not a comfort object. You are now, Serafina said with finality. Chancellor, draw up the papers. Adrian Cade is hereby appointed as the royal caretaker of the war nursery. His duties include maintenance of the facility, basic instruction, and proximity management. Proximity management, Adrian asked weakly. You will be there when they sleep, Serafina explained. You will be there when they panic. And you will be there when my daughter needs to shut off her brain. Varangar looked like he was about to have a stroke. This is madness. Putting a human in the heart of the royal nursery. He will poison their minds with alliance propaganda. If he speaks of treason, kill him, Serafina shrugged. But if he keeps them quiet, pay him triple. She looked at Adrian. Do you accept these terms, human, or would you prefer Varangar's green fire? Adrian felt the small, warm weight of the child on his shoulder. He felt the silver light of the lenses, and he thought about the triple hazard pay and what it would do for Maya. I accept, Adrian sighed, but I'm going to need a bigger budget for snacks. The transition to his new life was abrupt and chaotic. Adrian was moved from his maintenance pod in the basement to a suite adjacent to the Royal War Nursery. The room was luxurious by human standards, obsidian floors covered in thick furs, a bed large enough for 4 people, and a private sanitation unit that used sonic pulses instead of water. However, the luxury was somewhat undercut by the fact that he was living in a kindergarten for apex predators. The War Nursery was a sprawling complex on the upper levels of the West Spire. It was filled with climbing structures made of petrified wood pits of soft sand for combat training and shelves lined with both stuffed animals and blunt training swords. Adrian's first night was a disaster. He had just showered and collapsed onto his new bed, grateful for the silence when the door creaked open. He sat up instinctively, reaching for a weapon he didn't have. 3 pairs of glowing eyes peered at him from the darkness of the hallway. It was the Shadow Brood. We cannot sleep, a small voice whispered. The noise is back. Adrian rubbed his face. Listen, kids, I'm off the clock. Go back to your nests. No, said a small, stubborn demon girl named Jax. She marched into the room, clutching a stuffed dragon that had been decapitated and sewn back together. We sleep here. She climbed onto the bed. Hey, no, Adrian protested. Personal space boundaries. Two more followed her, then another. Within minutes, Adrian Cade was buried under a pile of small, warm, slightly sulfur-smelling bodies. He tried to push them off, but as soon as they made contact with him, they went limp, the shadow link tension leaving their bodies. The room filled with the sound of rhythmic purring and soft snores. Adrian lay there staring at the ceiling, trapped by 40 pounds of demon royalty. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Then the door opened again. Princess Arya stood there. She was wearing loose, sleeping silks, her hair unbound. She looked at the pile of children on Adrian's bed. She looked at the empty space on the left side of the mattress. She didn't say a word. She walked in, closed the door, and lay down in the empty space. Princess, Adrian whispered violently. You cannot be serious. Shut up, furniture, Arya mumbled, closing her eyes. Her tail snaked out and wrapped around his ankle. Territory claimed. 10 seconds later, she was asleep. Adrian lay awake for a long time, listening to the breathing of the enemy. But strangely, for the first time in years, the crushing guilt of the war felt a little lighter. He wasn't killing demons tonight. He was helping them rest. Weeks passed and a routine emerged from the chaos. Adrian's job description was vague, but in practice he became a hybrid of a teacher, a janitor, and an emotional anchor. He taught them human games which he adapted for their skill sets. Hide and seek became stealth and ambush. Tag became tactical pursuit. He told them stories about Earth filtering out the parts about the war. He told them about oceans made of water instead of lava, about forests that were green instead of black. The children were fascinated. To them, Earth was a mythical fairyland. Why do humans have no claws? A young prince named Kale asked one afternoon during lesson time. Because we use tools, Adrian explained, holding up a wrench. We aren't born strong, so we have to be smart. Is that why you are so quiet inside? Kale asked, tapping his own forehead. Because you are empty. Not empty, Adrian said, softly, looking out the window at the red sky. Just unconnected. Sometimes silence is its own kind of strength. Watching it all from the shadows was Commander Rhea Tal. She was there every day, standing guard by the door, her hand always near her weapon. She watched Adrian bandage scraped knees. She watched him break up fights between siblings who could breathe fire. She watched him gently scold a princess for trying to eat the chalk. Rhea hated humans. Her younger brother had been vaporized by an Alliance beam rifle 5 years ago. She had sworn an oath to never let a human walk free in the Citadel. But as she watched Adrian sit on the floor, surrounded by the children of her fallen comrades, reading from a datapad, with a voice that was rough but kind, she felt her resolve cracking. One afternoon, a young demon suffered a shadow spike, a sudden violent surge of psychic energy that caused seizures. The nurses backed away, afraid of the magical discharge. Adrian didn't back away. He dropped his wrench and lunged forward, grabbing the convulsing child. "Let go! He will burn you!" a nurse screamed. "He's terrified!" Adrian yelled back. He pulled the child against his chest, wrapping his arms around the thrashing limbs. He ignored the heat that singed his jumpsuit. He pressed his cheek to the boy's horned head and started humming a low, steady tone. It wasn't magic. It was just a vibration. But it acted as a grounding rod. The boy's seizures slowed. The wild magic dissipated. The child went limp, sobbing into Adrian's shoulder. Adrian looked up, sweat dripping down his face, his cheek red from the heat. He locked eyes with Rhea. Rhea didn't say anything. She just nodded a sharp, singular motion. That night, when Varangar's spies came to ask Rhea for a report on the humans' subversive activities, Rhea lied. The subject is performing maintenance duties, she wrote in her log. No threat detected. She closed the logbook and looked at the monitor showing the nursery bedroom. Adrian was asleep. Arya was asleep on the chair next to his bed, her hand resting near his. The children were sprawled everywhere. No threat, Rhea whispered to herself, but perhaps a complication. The peace in the nursery was real. But outside the walls of the West Spire, the political storm was gathering. The Shadow Link was quiet here, but in the rest of the Empire, the drums of war were beginning to beat again. And Adrian Cade was sitting right in the center of the target. The announcement of the summit hit the Nether Citadel like a physical blow. The air, usually thick with the static of the Shadow Link, became brittle and sharp. The gargoyles perched on the high spires seemed to hunch lower, and the magma flows in the deep chasms bubbled with an agitated rhythmic popping that sounded disturbingly like nervous heartbeats. High Marshal Tiber Holt was coming. To the demon populace, Holt was a boogeyman, a name whispered to frighten children into eating their sulfur cakes. He was the butcher of the Outer Rim, the man who had authorized the orbital bombardment of 3 civilian sectors. To Adrian Cade, standing in the common room of the war nursery and watching the news feed on a holographic projector, Holt was something worse. He was a memory. He was the voice on the radio 5 years ago, cold and detached, ordering mass murder as if he were ordering coffee. Adrian felt the old phantom pain flare in his missing leg. He gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles turning white. "You know him," a voice said behind him. Adrian turned. General Princess Arya stood in the doorway. She was fully armored today, her obsidian plates polished to a mirror, her helmet tucked under her arm. Her golden eyes were narrowed not in suspicion, but in scrutiny. "I served under him," Adrian corrected, his voice flat. "There is a difference." "The Shadow Link tastes of bile and rusted iron," Arya said, stepping into the room. She moved with the silent grace of a predator, though her tail twitched with agitation. "The city is angry. My mother thinks this treaty renewal will bring stability. The people think it brings an insult." "Holt does not want peace," Adrian said. "He wants submission, or an excuse." "An excuse for what?" "To finish what he started 5 years ago." Arya stopped in front of him. She was tall enough that she had to look down slightly to meet his eyes. "You are safe here, Adrian. You are royal property. Even a high marshal cannot touch the Queen's caretaker." Adrian managed a dry, humorless smile. "Property can be discarded, Princess, especially if it becomes politically inconvenient." Before Arya could respond, the comms unit on Adrian's belt chirped. It was a Priority 1 maintenance alert. Sector 4, gas main rupture, critical failure, immediate response required. Adrian frowned. "Sector 4. That is the thermal exchange for the lower barracks. It is miles away." "Go," Arya said, her tone shifting back to that of a commander. "If the thermal exchange fails, the lower levels freeze. I will watch Brood." "It is nap time in 20 minutes, Adrian warned, tapping his chrono. "Do not let Kale eat any more chalk, and make sure Jax does not sleep on the ceiling. She falls off when she dreams." "I am a general of the Empire," Arya scoffed, though there was a softness in her eyes. "I can handle a dozen sleeping whelps." Adrian looked at her, then at the sleeping mats arranged in the corner. A strange cold knot formed in his stomach. It felt like the premonition of incoming artillery he used to get in the trenches. "Right," Adrian said. "I will be back in an hour." He grabbed his toolkit and headed for the door. He did not know it then, but that was the last mistake of his civilian life. The maintenance call was a lie. Adrian realized it the moment he arrived at Sector 4. The pressure gauges were normal. The thermal conduits were humming with perfect efficiency. There was no leak, no rupture, and definitely no critical failure. "Computer," Adrian said to the wall terminal. "Verify alert source. Source Central Command override. Authorization Chancellor Varengar." The blood drained from Adrian's face. He didn't bother to pack his tools. He turned and ran. He ran on his flesh leg, and his metal one ignoring the agonizing impact of the steel on the stone floor. He ran until his lungs burned and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. When he reached the service elevator to the West Spire, his access code was denied. Access restricted. Security. Lockdown in progress. Damn it! Adrian slammed his fist against the panel. He pried the maintenance hatch open and began to climb the ladder, hauling himself up 50 floors by sheer desperate strength. The shadow link, which usually buzzed in his head like an unwanted radio station, was terrifyingly silent. It wasn't the peaceful silence of Arya's presence. It was a dead silence. A void. It was the silence of a heart that had stopped beating. When he finally burst through the doors of the war nursery gasping for air, he skidded to a halt. The room was empty. The sleeping mats were overturned. The stuffed dragons and knights were scattered across the floor. A half-eaten stick of chalk lay crushed near the window. But there were no children, no Arya, no guards. The air smelled sweet. It was a cloying chemical sweetness that Adrian recognized instantly. It was Somna 7, a heavy-grade military anesthetic gas used by the Human Alliance for prisoner transport. It was colorless, fast-acting, and distinctively human in origin. "No," Adrian whispered. "No, no, no." He stepped forward, his boot crunching on something. He looked down. It was a datapad lying on the floor. On the screen was a frozen image of a transfer order, stamped with a forged seal of the Human Alliance, authorizing the relocation of biological assets. "Excellent work, Spy." The voice came from the shadows. Chancellor Varengar stepped out flanked by 10 members of the Crimson Guard. But these were not the Queen's loyalists. They wore the green armbands of Varengar's personal house. Varengar held a handkerchief to his nose, smiling with his eyes. "The gas is quite effective, is it not? Your people make efficient poisons." "Where are they?" Adrian growled. He didn't care about the guards. He didn't care about the weapons pointed at him. "Where are the children? Sold," Varengar said smoothly. "To your old friend Tiber Holt. Or at least that is what the evidence will say. The human caretaker, bitter and greedy, sold the royal heirs to the enemy to spark a new war. A tragedy. The Queen will be devastated. She will demand blood. And Holt will simply defend himself against the savage beasts you sent to his camp." "You are insane," Adrian said, stepping forward. "You are going to kill them." "I am going to save the Empire from peace," Varengar corrected. "Guards, take him, and make sure the datapad is catalogued as evidence found on his person." 2 guards slammed Adrian into the wall. He fought, landing a solid punch on an obsidian breastplate that nearly broke his hand, but a blow to the back of his knee sent him crashing down. As they dragged him away, the sweet smell of the anesthetic lingered in his nose, mixing with the metallic taste of his own failure. The dungeon was the same as before, but the despair was new. Adrian sat in the darkness of the obsidian cell, his head in his hands. He had failed. He had allowed himself to get comfortable. He had allowed himself to believe that a janitor could protect monsters from monsters. He closed his eyes and tried to reach out. He wasn't shadow sensitive, not really. To him, the demon hive mind was just noise. But after months of sleeping in a pile of demon children, after weeks of acting as their grounding rod, something in his brain had changed. He had become attuned to their specific frequency. He listened for the chaotic giggles of Jax. He listened for the serious, brooding hum of Kale. He heard nothing, just the deep, oppressive silence of the earth. The door to his cell hissed open. Adrian didn't look up. "If you are here to confess, Varengar, save it. I already know you are a cartoon villain." "Stand up, Cade." It wasn't Varengar. It was Commander Rhea Tal. Adrian looked up. Rhea stood in the doorway, her helmet off. Her face was a mask of conflict. Her hand rested on her sword, her knuckles white. "Commander," Adrian said, his voice hoarse. "You have to listen to me. It was a setup. The gas was human, but—" "I know," Rhea cut him off. Adrian blinked. You know, I know the smell of Somna 7, Rhea said, stepping into the cell. I smelled it on the bodies of my squad 5 years ago. And I know that you, Adrian Cade, would rather cut off your remaining leg than let harm come to the brood. She threw a bundle of clothes at him. It was a light tactical vest and a cloak made of heat-resistant weave. Varangar has locked down the palace, Rhea said rapidly. He told the queen you confessed. He told her you admitted to selling the children to Holt for a reinstatement of your rank. Serafina is beside herself. Her grief is tearing the Shadow Link apart. She cannot sense the truth. And Arya? Adrian asked, pulling on the vest. Missing, Rhea said grimly. She was guarding the nursery. When Varangar's men came, she fought. They used the gas on her too. She is gone, taken with the children. Rhea looked Adrian in the eye. I am the commander of the Royal Guard. My duty is to the Queen and the law. Breaking a prisoner out of the obsidian cells is high treason. It is punishable by eternal torment in the soul forges. She drew her sword, the blade glowing with a faint purple light, and slashed the control panel of his shackles. The cuffs fell away with a clang. But my nephew was in that room, Rhea said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. And if Varangar thinks he can use my blood for his politics, he is going to learn why I earned the title of Godbreaker. Adrian rubbed his wrists. What is the plan? We leave, Rhea said. I have a stealth skiff waiting at the waste disposal chute. It is not dignified, but it is unmonitored. Where are we going? I do not know, Rhea admitted. The trail is cold. The sensors show nothing. I might know, Adrian said. He closed his eyes again, pressing his fingers to his temples. He pushed past the silence, past the fear, searching for that familiar annoyance. That static, that specific rhythmic thumping he had felt every night for months. It was faint. So faint it was like hearing a whisper in a hurricane. But it was there, a tiny, terrified blip on the radar of his mind. Below, Adrian whispered. Deep, not in the city, below the foundations. The ash chasm, Rhea frowned. That is a death zone. The air is 90% silica dust and toxic fumes. The magical field is erratic. No demon can sustain magic down there for long, without their veins clogging with ash. Good thing I don't have veins, Adrian said, grabbing a spare pipe from the floor as a makeshift weapon. And good thing I am not a demon. Rhea looked at him, a flicker of respect crossing her severe features. For a soft skin, you are surprisingly difficult to kill. I am a cockroach commander, Adrian said, heading for the door. We are hard to stamp out. Let's go get the kids. The ash chasm was less a place and more an open wound on the planet's surface. It was a jagged tear in the crust, miles deep, filled with swirling gray storms of volcanic ash and clouds of acidic gas. The stealth skiff had failed 2 miles up, its intakes clogged, forcing them to crash land on a precarious ledge of obsidian. Now they were walking. Rhea was struggling. Her natural heat vents, the glowing magma lines on her skin, were fighting to stay clear of the ash. She coughed, expelling black dust, her movement sluggish. Her armor, usually a source of strength, was heavy and suffocating. Adrian, on the other hand, was relatively fine. He wore a standard-issue human filtration mask he had salvaged from the skiff. His prosthetic leg crunched reliably into the loose shale. His lack of magical physiology meant the erratic energy fields that were making Rhea nauseous had zero effect on him. I feel like I am wading through molasses, Rhea grunted, leaning on her sword. How are you moving so fast? I grew up in old Chicago, Adrian called back, offering her a hand to pull her up a rock face. The air quality index here is actually an improvement. Suddenly, a rock slide rattled down the cliff face above them. Rhea spun around, sword raised, but her reaction time was slow. A shadow dropped from the gloom, landing silently between them. It was Arya. She looked terrible. Her armor was dented, her silk tunic torn. One of her horns was chipped, but her eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying lucidness. Arya, Rhea lowered her sword. How did you escape? I woke up in a transport container. Arya spat her tail, lashing the air. They thought the gas would hold me for 6 hours. They underestimated my metabolism. She looked at Adrian. I killed 3 guards. I left their heads on the road as markers. Varangar, Adrian asked. He was not there. Just mercenaries. Humans and demons working together. Arya sneered. Traitors. She looked at Adrian, and her expression softened, just a fraction. She reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. You came. I am the caretaker, Adrian said simply. It is in the job description. The signal is stronger here, Arya said, pointing down into the swirling gray fog. I can hear them. They are crying, but it is muffled, confused. It is the Iron Maw, Rhea realized, looking at the coordinates. The old mining facility from the First Age. It is shielded against scrying. Then we knock on the front door, Arya said, extending her claws. No, Adrian stopped her. If we go aggressive, they panic. If they panic, they might hurt the hostages. We need to be smart. We need to be tactical. He looked at the 2 powerful demon warriors. I have a plan, but you are going to have to trust the human. Arya looked at Rhea. Rhea looked at Arya. You are the furniture, Arya said. Lead the way. The Iron Maw was a fortress of rusted metal, built into the side of a lava tube. It was ugly industrial, and bristling with defenses. Inside the main hangar, the scene was a grotesque parody of a film set. Huge lights were rigged up on gantries, illuminating a central cage made of laser-inscribed force bars. Inside the cage, 20 demon children were huddled together. They were terrified, stripped of their finery covered in dust. Around the cage, cameras were rolling. Action! A director shouted. He was a human, wearing a pristine white suit. A group of actors dressed in Human Alliance uniforms stepped forward. They were holding shock batons. They began to jab at the cage, shouting racial slurs against demons, laughing manically. Cry louder, you little monsters, one of the actors shouted, rattling the bars. Let the galaxy see how weak you are. Up on the catwalks hidden in the shadows, Adrian watched with a cold fury that froze his blood. It was a propaganda film. Varangar and Holt were manufacturing a massacre. They would film the torture, then kill the children, then broadcast the footage to the Demon Empire to incite a frenzy. I am going to rip their throats out, Arya hissed beside him. Wait, Adrian whispered. He was looking at the control console on the far side of the room. It controlled the cage locks and the facility's automated defenses. Rhea, can you make that jump? Rhea looked at the distance, 30 feet of open air to the control platform. In this atmosphere, I might fall. I won't let you fall, Arya said. She grabbed Rhea's arm. Throw me. What? Throw me. I will draw their fire. You get to the console. Adrian, you get to the cage. Me, Adrian whispered. I can't fight 10 armed mercenaries. You don't have to fight them, Arya said, her eyes glowing. You just have to wake up the cavalry. Before Adrian could argue, Arya roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated challenge. She leaped from the catwalk, descending into the hangar like an avenging angel of death. For the blood, Arya screamed, landing on top of a mercenary and crushing him instantly. Chaos erupted. The actors screamed and dropped their batons, pulling real plasma pistols from their belts. Security droids deployed from the walls. Rhea used the distraction to sprint along the railing and leap for the control platform. She landed hard, rolling, and immediately engaged the 2 guards stationed there in a flurry of sparks and steel. Adrian ran. He slid down a support ladder, hitting the deck running. Laser fire zipped past his head. He ignored it. He focused entirely on the cage. He reached the bars. The children were screaming, huddled in the center, their eyes wide with panic. The Shadow Link was a cacophony of terror. White noise so loud it threatened to burst Adrian's eardrums. Help! Mommy! Burn! Die! Run! Adrian grabbed the bars. They burned his hands, but he didn't let go. He pressed his forehead against the metal. "Hey!" he shouted, not with his voice but with his intent. He projected the same feeling he used when he sat in the rocking chair at night. The feeling of safety, the feeling of order. "Listen to me." Inside the cage, Cale looked up. Jax stopped crying. Adrian closed his eyes and started to hum. It was a low, guttural vibration. He visualized a map. He visualized the hangar. He visualized the mercenaries as red dots and the children as blue dots. He didn't try to calm them down this time. He tried to direct them. Pack, Adrian thought. Formation Alpha. Protect the little ones. Strikers to the front. The effect was electric. The shadow link snapped. The static vanished. In its place was a crystalline clarity. The children's eyes changed. The panic evaporated, replaced by a dull, shark-like focus. They didn't look at each other. They didn't have to. They moved as one organism. Rhea smashed the control panel on the platform above. The laser bars flickered and died. "Get them!" the human director screamed, pointing at the cage. The mercenaries turned their weapons toward the children. "Now!" Adrian shouted. The cage door flew open. But it wasn't a stampede of frightened toddlers that came out. It was a tactical strike team. Jax, the small girl who dreamed of falling, launched herself into the air, her tiny wings buzzing. She didn't fly. She glided, landing directly on the face of the nearest mercenary, her claws digging into his visor. Cale and 3 of the older boys formed a wedge. They lowered their heads, horns facing forward, and charged the knees of the security droids. Metal crunched. "Left flank iron, take the heavy weapon," Adrian yelled, pointing. He didn't need to shout. The command hit the shadow link instantly. Iron, a stout boy with metallic scales, veered left, ignoring the blaster fire that pinged off his hide. He bit through the power cable of the heavy repeater cannon. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. Adrian stood in the center of the chaos, unmoving. He was the eye of the storm. He felt everything. He saw through 40 pairs of eyes at once. He felt the recoil of a blaster bolt hitting Cale's shoulder, non-lethal, just a bruise. He felt the triumph of Jax as she disabled her target. He was the conductor of a symphony of violence. A mercenary charged Adrian, a combat knife raised. "Die, traitor." Adrian didn't move. He didn't have to. Without looking, he projected threat. 6 o'clock. 3 children disengaged from their targets and leaped over Adrian's head. They hit the mercenary midair, tackling him to the ground before he could get within 5 feet of the caretaker. "Do not kill," Adrian commanded, his voice echoing in the psychic web. "Disable only. We are not them." The children hesitated, their jaws hovering over exposed throats. They growled, frustration vibrating through the link, but they obeyed. They slammed the mercenaries' heads into the concrete instead of tearing them off. Within 3 minutes, the hangar was silent. The mercenaries were groaning on the floor, bound with cables. The security droids were scrap metal. The director was cowering behind a camera, wetting his pants. Arya stood atop a pile of crates, breathing hard blood, not hers, dripping from her claws. Rhea was leaning over the railing above, wiping her sword. Adrian slumped against the cage bars, exhausted. The connection faded, leaving him with a splitting migraine. The children shook their heads, blinking. The tactical shark eyes faded, replaced by normal, teary pupil eyes. They looked around, realizing what they had done, and immediately burst into tears. They rushed to Adrian. Caretaker, scared. They buried him. Again. Adrian sat on the floor of the slaughterhouse, patting heads and checking for injuries, while 20 lethal biological weapons cried into his vest. "It is okay," Adrian murmured, rocking back and forth. "It is nap time. It is just nap time." Arya walked over. She stepped over the unconscious body of a mercenary. She looked at Adrian, and then at the children clinging to him. "You weaponized the nursery," she said, her voice filled with awe and a little bit of horror. "I improvised," Adrian corrected tiredly. Rhea dragged the human director down the stairs. She threw him at Adrian's feet. "This one wants to talk," Rhea said. "He says he has the encryption keys to the private comms channel between Varengar and Holt." The director looked up trembling. "Please, I just hold the camera. They are at the summit. They are signing the renewal in 2 hours. Once they sign, the bombardment starts. Holt has ships in orbit, waiting for the signal." Adrian looked at the director. Then he looked at the camera equipment. "The summit is in the Great Hall," Adrian said, his mind racing. "Live broadcast to both the Demon Empire and the Human Alliance." "Yes," the director squeaked, "to show the peace." "Or to show the reason for war," Arya added darkly. Adrian stood up gently, dislodging a sobbing princess from his leg. He looked at the camera. He looked at the data drives labeled Evidence. "Rhea," Adrian said, "can you fly that stealth skiff if we bypass the safety limiters?" "I can fly a brick if I have to," Rhea said. "Good," Adrian said. He picked up the director's camera. "We aren't running away. We are going to the party." "We are?" Arya asked, tilting her head. "Yes," Adrian said, checking the charge on his plasma pistol. "And we are bringing the kids. It is time for a field trip." He turned to the children, who were looking at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Listen up, squad," Adrian said, his voice firm. "We have one more game to play. It is called Show and Tell, and we are going to tell everyone exactly what happened here." The Shadow Link hummed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was determination. "Pack ready," Kale chirped, revealing his sharp teeth. "Pack ready," Adrian echoed. "Let's go start a riot." The Great Hall of the Nether Citadel was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a cavernous space carved from the heart of a dormant volcano, where the ceiling was lost in shadows and the floor was a seamless expanse of polished obsidian that reflected the flickering light of the magna torches lining the walls. Today, however, the intimidation was diplomatic. At the far end of the hall, raised on a dais of dragonbone and iron, sat Queen Seraphina Nyx. She wore her ceremonial robes of deep crimson, a heavy crown of black diamonds resting on her brow. Her face was a mask of regal indifference, but her fingers were tapping a staccato rhythm on the armrest of her throne, a telltale sign that she was holding back the urge to incinerate everyone in the room. Opposite her, seated at a long table made of synthesized white marble that looked ludicrously out of place in the dark architecture, was the delegation from the Human Alliance. High Marshal Tiber Holt sat in the center. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of gray granite. His uniform was impeccable, his medals gleaming under the harsh lights. He had a face that had forgotten how to smile 20 years ago, and eyes that assessed every living thing as either a target or a resource. Between them stood Chancellor Varengar. The Demon Chancellor was vibrating with a nervous, manic energy. He held a datapad, as if it were a holy scripture. "The terms are standard," Holt said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. It was a cold voice, devoid of inflection. A 5-year extension of the ceasefire. A demilitarized zone extending 10,000 kilometers from the planetary orbit. And of course, the immediate extradition of any Alliance criminals hiding within the Empire. "Criminals," Seraphina repeated the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. "You mean refugees?" "I mean deserters," Holt corrected smoothly. "Men who lack the stomach for necessary measures." Varengar stepped forward, bowing low enough that his nose nearly touched the floor. "A small price for peace, Your Majesty. Surely the prosperity of the Empire is worth returning a few cowards to their rightful jurisdiction." Seraphina looked at Varengar. She looked at Holt. She could feel the shadow link of the city outside it, was anxious, buzzing with a low-frequency dread. The people knew Holt was here. They remembered the fires. "And where is my daughter?" Seraphina asked sharply. "General Arya was meant to be here for the signing. And the caretaker." Why are the heirs not present? Varangar's smile faltered for a microsecond before widening into a rictus of sorrow. Ah, yes, about that. There has been a development. A tragedy, really. He gestured to the massive holographic screens that floated above the center of the hall. We were waiting for the right moment to break the news, Your Majesty, Varangar said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. But it seems the human caretaker, this Adrian Cade, was not the benign servant we thought. What are you talking about? Serafina stood up, her tail lashing behind her. We have intercepted a transmission, Varangar said. He has taken the children. He has taken General Arya. And based on the footage we recovered from his quarters, Varangar tapped the datapad. The screens flickered to life. Static washed over the hall, followed by a grainy, high-contrast image. It was a fake. A deep fake constructed with sophisticated CGI, but to the untrained eye, it was damning. On the screen, a digital Adrian Cade was laughing. He was holding a shock prod. Behind him, in a cage demon, children were screaming. I will sell them piece by piece, the digital Adrian shouted. The Queen will pay in blood. A gasp ripped through the great hall. The demon nobles in the audience roared, leaping to their feet. The royal guard drew their weapons. The shadow link exploded into a cacophony of rage and grief, so potent it shook the dust from the ceiling. He betrayed us, a noble shouted. Death to humans, Holt watched the screen with a look of mild distaste. It seems your vetting process is flawed, Queen Serafina. This is what happens when you let vermin into your house. Serafina stared at the screen. Her heart stopped. The image of the human she had trusted, the man whose lap her daughter had slept on, torturing her kin, broke something inside her. Find him, Serafina whispered, her eyes turning black. Find him and fry him alive. Varangar bowed, hiding his triumphant grin. We have already dispatched a kill squad, Your Majesty. Justice will be... He never finished the sentence. The massive double doors at the entrance of the Great Hall did not open. They detonated. A blast of concussive force blew the heavy ironwood doors off their hinges. They flew through the air, crashing into the banquet tables and sending Alliance delegates diving for cover. Smoke billowed into the hall, and from the smoke, a nightmare emerged. It was not an army. It was a pack. Adrian Cade walked in first. He looked like he had been chewed up and spat out by the planet itself. His maintenance jumpsuit was shredded. His face was smeared with gray ash and blue demon blood. His prosthetic leg whirred audibly, the servos straining. He was holding a plasma pistol in one hand and a video camera in the other. But he was not alone. Clinging to his legs, his back, and his waist were 20 demon children. They were covered in dust, their eyes wide and feral, their teeth bared. They moved with him, a single organism of scales and horns. Flanking him were General Arya and Commander Rhea Tal. Arya was missing a pauldron. Rhea was limping. Both of them looked murderous. The hall went deathly silent. Adrian limped forward, the children growling at anyone who made a sudden move. He stopped 20 feet from the dais, ignoring the hundreds of weapons pointed at him. He looked up at the floating screen where his digital doppelganger was still laughing maniacally. You know, Adrian said, his voice raspy, but projecting clearly through the silence. The lighting in that video is terrible, and I would never wear that jacket. It clashes with my eyes. Seize him, Varangar shrieked, pointing a shaking finger. He has returned to kill the Queen. Kill him. Move and I drop the shield, Arya roared. She stepped in front of Adrian, her claws extended, glowing with dark energy. Anyone who touches him dies. Arya. Serafina stepped down from the dais, confusion warring with rage. Step away from the monster. He tortured the brood. He saved the brood, Arya screamed back. Look at them, Mother. Look at them. Serafina looked. She saw the children. They weren't cowering from Adrian. They were protecting him. Iron, the boy with metallic scales, was standing in front of Adrian's bad leg, his small shield raised. Jax was perched on Adrian's shoulder, hissing at the Alliance delegation. "Varangar is lying," Adrian said. He threw the video camera onto the table in front of Holt. It skidded across the marble and stopped in front of the High Marshal. "He didn't find that video. He produced it. In an old mining facility called the Iron Maw." Holt didn't look at the camera. He looked at Adrian. Recognition flickered in his cold eyes. "Cade," Holt said softly. "I thought you died in the gutters of Chicago." "I got a better job offer," Adrian replied. "This is a trick," Varangar yelled. "He has brainwashed them. He is using human mind control tech. Guards fire." 3 members of Varangar's Crimson Guard raised their rifles. "No," Serafina commanded. But Varangar had anticipated this. These were his men. They pulled the triggers. Plasma bolts shrieked through the air. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't dive. He simply thought, "Shield." It wasn't magic. It was a command sent through the tactile connection of the children clinging to him. Simultaneously, 6 of the older demon children, including Kale, snapped their hands forward. A hexagonal barrier of combined shadow energy materialized in front of Adrian. The plasma bolts hit the barrier and dissipated harmlessly into sparks. The hall gasped. Children, untrained, volatile children, had just executed a perfect defensive formation. "Lenses," Arya barked the order to the court mages standing by the pillars. "Connect the ancestral lenses to the pack now." The mages, terrified by the general's fury, obeyed. They chanted the binding spell linking the giant obsidian pillars to the collective consciousness of the children. "Show them," Adrian whispered to the child on his shoulder. "Show them what happened." The lenses flared with blinding silver-blue light. The holographic screens above the hall flickered. The fake video of Adrian dissolved. In its place, raw memory flooded the room. But it wasn't just visual. Because of the lenses, every demon in the Great Hall felt the memory. They felt the cold, suffocating terror of waking up in a cage. They smelled the cloying sweetness of the Somna 7 gas. They heard the laughter of the mercenaries. They felt the confusion as the actors in Alliance uniforms poked them with shock batons. And they heard the voice of the director. "Make them cry louder. Varangar needs good audio for the summit." The sensory bombardment was overwhelming. Aristocrats fell to their knees weeping. Guards dropped their weapons, clutching their heads. Then the memory shifted. They felt a presence. A warm, steady rhythm in the chaos. Caretaker. They felt the lock breaking. They felt the surge of tactical clarity. They felt the overwhelming, unconditional safety of being behind the human with the limp. The memory ended. The silence in the Great Hall was heavy enough to crush bones. Queen Serafina stood frozen. Tears of black ichor streamed down her face. She looked from the screen to Varangar. Varangar was backing away, his face pale green. "It is a fabrication, a hallucination induced by humans." "And what about this?" Adrian asked. He reached into his shredded pocket and pulled out an old battered data chip. It was an Alliance standard issue scarred by fire and time. "You call me a criminal, Holt," Adrian said, turning to the High Marshal. "You told the world I was stripped of my rank for cowardice, for refusing to engage the enemy." Adrian slotted the chip into the datapad on the table. "Let's hear the playback." Audio crackled through the hall speakers. It was grainy, recorded 5 years ago on a bridge under fire. Voice 1, Adrian. "Target confirmed. Sector 7G. It is a residential block, Marshal. Heat signatures indicate non-combatants. Hatchlings. Hundreds of them." Voice 2, Holt. "The order stands, Commander Cade. Burn it." Voice 1, Adrian. "Sir, that is a war crime. There are no military targets. I will not fire." Voice 2, Holt. "You will fire or I will have you executed for treason. These are not people, Cade. They are animals. Clear the grid." Voice 1, Adrian. "Negative. I am locking the firing mechanism. You want to kill them? You have to come down here and do it yourself." Sound of a struggle. A gunshot. The recording ends. Adrian pulled the chip out. I didn't save them all, Adrian said, his voice breaking slightly. You bypassed my lock. You fired the cannons anyway. But I bought them in 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, 3 transport ships escaped. He looked at Serafina. One of those ships carried your sister, Your Majesty. I saw the manifest. Serafina let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. She looked at Holt with a hatred so pure it heated the air around her. You, Serafina hissed. You ordered the Red Ash massacre, and you sit at my table. Holt stood up. He didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed. It was war, Holt said, adjusting his cuffs. We did what was necessary to ensure the survival of humanity, and I would do it again. He looked at Varengar. It seems our arrangement is concluded, Chancellor. You failed to contain the variable. Arrangement? Serafina's voice was low. He promised me a war, Holt said, drawing a heavy kinetic revolver from his holster with practiced speed. Since he cannot deliver a false flag, I suppose I will just have to start it the old-fashioned way. Holt raised the gun, aiming not at Serafina, but at the cluster of children clinging to Adrian. No witnesses, Holt said. Pack! Adrian screamed. The Shadow Link snapped into combat mode. It happened in slow motion. Varengar screamed, Kill them all! And his traitor guards opened fire. The great hall erupted into chaos. Formation Delta scatter and harass, Adrian commanded mentally. The children exploded outward, like a fragmentation grenade. They were small, fast, and terrifyingly coordinated. Jax flew into the face of a gunner, blinding him. 2 others scurried between the legs of the Alliance delegates, biting ankles and pulling them to the ground. Rhea Tal drew her sword and vaulted over the table, engaging 3 of Varengar's guards at once in a blur of sparks. Arya transformed fully. Wings of shadow erupted from her back, and she launched herself at the ceiling, diving down on the heavy weapons team like a meteor. Adrian did not fight. He directed. He stood in the center of the melee, ducking under a laser blast. Kale, left flank shield, up iron cover fire. Rhea, watch your 6. He was the Nexus. He saw the battle from 40 different angles. He felt the pain of a scraped knee, the recoil of a gun, the adrenaline of the jump. Holt was moving through the chaos with professional efficiency, shooting at anything with horns. He was heading for the side exit. He is running! Adrian shouted. Iron, the metallic boy, saw Holt. He charged, ignoring the pistol rounds bouncing off his scales. He lunged, clamping his jaws around Holt's cybernetic leg. Holt grunted, stumbling. He aimed his gun at Iron's head. No, Adrian moved. He didn't think so. He didn't strategize. He just threw himself across the gap. Holt pulled the trigger. The bullet didn't hit Iron. It hit Adrian. It slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike that shattered his concentration. The Shadow Link screamed in agony, not just his pain, but the collective psychic scream of 20 children feeling their caretaker get hit. Adrian! Arya shrieked from the rafters. Adrian hit the floor. He gasped, clutching his shoulder. Blood, bright red human blood, leaked through his fingers. Holt kicked Iron away and leveled the gun at Adrian's head. You always were soft, Cade, Holt sneered. That is why you never made general. Adrian looked up. His vision was swimming. But then he felt it. The Shadow Link didn't scatter. It coalesced. It poured into him. The rage of Arya. The protective fury of Rhea. The terrified desperation of the children. The grief of the Queen. It all funneled into Adrian Cade. He didn't need a gun. He had the pack. Attack, Adrian whispered. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a psychic hammer blow. Every demon in the room connected via the lenses, and the raw emotion of the moment focused their intent on Tiber Holt. Holt froze. He dropped the gun, clutching his head. He screamed as the collective trauma of 1 million survivors crashed into his mind. He fell to his knees, nose-bleeding eyes rolling back. Adrian struggled to his feet. He picked up Holt's fallen revolver. The hall went silent. The fighting stopped. Varangar was pinned to the floor by Rhea. The traitor guards were dead or surrendered. Everyone looked at Adrian. He stood over Holt, the man who had ruined his life, the man who had killed thousands, the man who had tried to kill the kids. Adrian aimed the gun at Holt's forehead. The shadow link hummed with anticipation. Kill him. Do it. Justice. Blood. The children were watching. Kale Iron Jacks. They were watching their caretaker. They were waiting to see what he would do. Adrian's finger tightened on the trigger. He wanted to do it. God, he wanted to do it. It would be so easy. He looked at Iron, who was limping nearby. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and bloodlust. If Adrian pulled the trigger, he would teach them that vengeance was the only answer. He would prove that humans were exactly what Holt said. They were killers. Adrian exhaled. The red haze in his mind cleared. He shifted his aim 3 inches to the right. Bang! The bullet smashed into the marble floor next to Holt's ear, sending stone chips flying. Holt flinched, curling into a ball. Adrian dropped the gun. It clattered loudly on the obsidian. "I am not you," Adrian said, his voice trembling but clear. "And I won't let them become you." He looked at the children. "It is over. Stand down." The tension in the room snapped. The children rushed to him, ignoring the blood, crying and hugging his legs. Serafina walked forward. She looked at Holt, shivering on the floor, and then at Adrian, bleeding, but standing tall amidst a pile of weeping demons. "Commander Rhea," Serafina said, her voice like iron. "Your Majesty. Arrest Chancellor Varangar for high treason. Take High Marshal Holt into custody. We will invite the Alliance to a new summit, one where we discuss his trial for crimes against sentient life." "With pleasure," Rhea said, hauling Varangar up by his collar. Serafina knelt down in front of Adrian. She didn't look at him like a servant. She looked at him like an equal. "You bleed red," Serafina observed softly. "It is a design flaw," Adrian mumbled, swaying slightly. "No," Serafina said, placing a hand gently on his uninjured shoulder to steady him. "It is just a different color. But the heart is the same." Adrian tried to smile, but the floor was rushing up to meet him. "I think," Adrian whispered, "I am going to take that nap now." And then he passed out. The royal infirmary smelled of antiseptic and lemongrass incense. It was a stark contrast to the sulfur of the rest of the citadel. Adrian woke up to a dull throb in his shoulder and a sharp weight on his legs. He opened his eyes. He was in a biobed, his shoulder encased in a regenerative gel pack. Sleeping on his legs was Jax. Sleeping on his good arm was Iron. Sleeping on the chair next to the bed with her head resting on the mattress near his hip was General Arya. She wasn't wearing armor. She was wearing a simple linen robe. Her hair was messy. Adrian moved his hand slightly. Arya's eyes snapped open. Gold met brown. "You are awake," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "I am alive," Adrian corrected, surprised. "Barely." Arya sat up, rubbing her face. She glared at him, but there was no heat in it. "You are an idiot, a colossal soft-skinned, bone-headed idiot." "I have been called worse," Adrian rasped. "You jumped in front of a kinetic round," Arya said, her voice rising. "For a demon. Do you know how stupid that is? Your body is paste, Adrian. You don't have scales. You break." "Iron is a kid," Adrian said. "I'm a grown-up. That's how it works." Arya looked at him. Her lower lip trembled slightly. She reached out and touched the bandage on his shoulder. Her claws were retracted, her fingers gentle. "You scared me," she whispered. "When you fell, the silence came back. For a second, the silence came back." "I'm not going anywhere," Adrian said. "I still have a contract. Triple pay, remember." Arya let out a watery laugh. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. "Who let you be this stupid on my territory, human?" she murmured. "I learned from the best," Adrian replied, resting his hand on her hair. From the doorway, Commander Rhea Tal watched them. She was leaning against the frame, peeling an orange with a combat knife. She watched the humans stroking the hair of the demon general. She watched the demon children drooling on the expensive medical sheets. She smiled. It was a small, rare thing. She pushed herself off the doorframe and walked away, tapping her comms unit. "Control," Rhea said. "Cancel the security rotation for the infirmary. The caretaker is secure. The pack is home." Adrian closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the breathing around him. The shadow link was there, a constant hum in the back of his mind. But it wasn't noisy anymore. It wasn't a headache. It was a song. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cade knew the words. 3 years had passed since the day the doors of the Great Hall were blown off their hinges by a maintenance worker and a pack of feral children. In the grand scheme of galactic history, 3 years was a blink of an eye. But for the planet Nerith, and for the human alliance, it had been a lifetime. High Marshal Tiber Holt was currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a solitary confinement cell on the moon of Titan. He spent his days staring at gray walls and eating unseasoned nutrient paste, a fate that many argued was too kind, but one that Queen Seraphina had agreed to in the spirit of diplomatic evolution. Chancellor Varengar had met a far more definitive and significantly warmer end involving the Soul Forges and a very enthusiastic executioner. The war that everyone had held their breath for did not happen. Instead, something far more terrifying and exhausting occurred: bureaucracy. The Treaty of the Red Ash was rewritten. It was no longer a ceasefire. It was a blueprint for coexistence. It contained clauses for joint trade, shared medical technology, and most controversially, the integration of education systems. And the monument to this new, fragile era stood on the windswept highlands, a vast plateau located exactly on the border between the scorched lands of the Demon Empire and the terraformed zones of the Human Alliance. It was called the Twin Flame Academy. The architecture was a physical manifestation of the compromise. The west wing was carved from the traditional black obsidian of the demons, spiked and imposing, heated by geothermal veins. The east wing was a structure of gleaming steel and reinforced glass, typical of human brutalist efficiency. Where they met in the center, the materials fused. Glass flowed into stone, iron veins wrapped around steel beams. It was messy, chaotic, and strangely beautiful. Adrian Cade stood in his office in the central tower, looking out over the campus. The sun, the real sun, not the angry red glare of the Nether Citadel's lava pits, was setting, casting long golden shadows across the training fields. "Warden Cade," a voice crackled over his desk intercom. "You are 5 minutes late for the Budget Committee meeting. Again." Adrian sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He adjusted the collar of his uniform. It was no longer the gray jumpsuit of a janitor. It was a deep navy tunic with silver trim, the official colors of the academy. He hated it. It itched. "I am coming, Dr. Evans," Adrian replied, pressing the button. "I was just strategizing." "You were hiding," the voice corrected. "If you are not here in 2 minutes, Commander Tal says she will come and retrieve you. And she is bringing the stun baton." Adrian winced. "On my way." He grabbed his datapad and limped toward the door. His prosthetic leg hummed quietly. It was a new model, a gift from the Queen's Royal Artificers. It was lighter, faster, and had a built-in heater for the cold Highland nights. Adrian often joked that his leg was now worth more than the entire academy budget. He stepped out into the hallway and was immediately nearly trampled by a stampede of students. "Make way, Warden coming through," shouted a familiar voice. Kale, now a lanky teenager with horns that scraped the top of the doorframe, skidded to a halt. He was wearing the Academy cadet uniform, which looked perpetually 2 sizes too small for his rapidly growing frame. "Sir," Kale saluted, a gesture that was half human, military precision, and half demon mockery. "Kale," Adrian nodded. "Why are you running in the corridors, Regulation 4, Section 2. We are not running, sir, Kale grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. We are conducting a tactical retreat from the cafeteria. They are serving that human meatloaf again. Behind Kale, a group of human and demon students laughed. They were a motley crew. A human girl with cybernetic eyes was giving a piggyback ride to a small demon boy with red scales. A demon girl was comparing arm wrestling strength with a human boy who looked terrified but determined. 3 years ago, these species would have shot each other on sight. Now they were bonding over the shared trauma of cafeteria food. "Carry on," Adrian said, suppressing a smile. "And tell the kitchen staff I said to add more hot sauce. It masks the texture." "Yes, sir," Kale signaled the pack, and they thundered down the hall. Adrian watched them go. The shadow link, which used to be a buzzing headache in the back of his skull, was now a constant, low thrum. It felt like standing in a room with 100 purring cats. It was the sound of a generation that was not afraid. He made it to the conference room exactly 30 seconds before Rhea Tal made good on her threat. Rhea sat at the head of the security table. She had not mellowed with age. If anything, peace had made her more paranoid. She wore the black and gold armor of the Academy Guard, and her eyes tracked every movement in the room. However, Adrian noticed that there was a fresh cup of coffee waiting at his seat, black 2 sugars, exactly how he liked it. Next to the coffee sat a human man, Captain Vance, the logistics officer. Vance was a burly man with a thick beard and a laugh that shook the windows. He was currently whispering something to Rhea that made the terrifying demon commander flush a dark purple and look away. "Warden," Rhea coughed, composing herself instantly as Adrian sat down. "Nice of you to join us." "I got held up by a tactical retreat," Adrian said, taking a sip of the coffee. He caught Vance's eye and winked. Vance grinned into his beard. "The budget," Dr. Evans, the human administrator, said loudly, tapping the table. "We are spending 40% of our surplus on target practice dummies." "Why?" "Because General Aria's field tactics class keeps eating them," Adrian explained. "Literally eating them. We switched to the organic compound dummies so they wouldn't get indigestion." "It is a necessary expense," a voice came from the doorway. Aria walked in. If Rhea was the shield of the academy, Aria was the sword. She wore a simple instructor's tunic, her sleeves rolled up to reveal scars that told the history of the war. Her horns were polished, and her tail swayed with a lazy, dangerous rhythm. She walked over to Adrian's chair. She didn't sit down. She simply leaned against the table, her hip brushing against his shoulder. It was a casual, possessive gesture that made the demon staff avert their eyes out of respect, and the human staff smile. "My students need to learn how to hunt," Aria said. "Unless you want them to practice on the logistics team," Captain Vance raised his hands. "Please no. I am too fatty. High cholesterol." The room chuckled. The tension that used to define these meetings, the racial tension, the hatred, was gone. It had been replaced by the mundane bickering of coworkers. Adrian looked around the table. He looked at the humans and demons arguing about budgets and meal plans. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was contentment. Later that evening, Adrian stood in the lecture hall for his final class of the day, Tactical Situations and Moral Decisions. The room was full. 50 students, a 50-50 split of human and demon, sat in the tiered rows. "Open your textbooks to page 300, Adrian said, his voice echoing slightly in the acoustic chamber. The siege of Sector 7. A ripple of unease went through the room. Sector 7 was the incident, the massacre, the reason Adrian had a metal leg. "Most history books," Adrian began, pacing the stage, "will tell you that Sector 7 was a strategic necessity. They will tell you that the orbital bombardment was authorized to prevent a counterattack." He stopped and looked at the students. He looked at Kale in the front row. He looked at a human girl named Sarah, whose father had been a pilot in that bombardment. "I was there," Adrian said softly, "and I am here to tell you that history books lie." He tapped the holographic projector. The map of Sector 7 appeared. It showed the heat signatures, the hundreds of civilian clusters. "There was no counterattack force," Adrian said. "There were families. There were hatchlings. There were people cooking dinner and putting their children to sleep." The room was deadly silent. "War," Adrian continued, "is not about glory. It is not about winning. War is a series of choices, and usually they are bad choices. The question you have to ask yourself every single time you pick up a weapon is not, 'Can I kill this target?'" He looked at Sarah. He looked at Cale. "The question is, can I live with myself if I do?" He let the silence hang there for a long moment. "I chose not to fire," Adrian said. "I lost my rank. I lost my leg. I lost my citizenship. I spent 5 years scrubbing toilets." He smiled, a small, crooked smile. "And it was the best deal I ever made." From the back of the room, Arya was watching. She stood in the shadows, her arms crossed. Her eyes were glowing with a fierce, quiet pride. She didn't intervene. She didn't add her own war stories. She just let him speak. When the class ended, the students didn't rush out. They packed their bags, slowly, looking at Adrian, with a mixture of awe and contemplation. "Warden," Sarah asked, stopping by his desk, "if you were ordered to do it again, knowing what you know now—" "I would have shot the commander sooner," Adrian said, without hesitation. Sarah blinked, then smiled. "Good night, sir." "Good night, Sarah." As the last student left, Arya walked down the steps. She stopped in front of his desk, picking up a piece of chalk. "You are getting soft, Cade," she teased. "Telling them to shoot commanders, that sounds like mutiny." "It is called proactive leadership," Adrian replied, gathering his notes. Arya walked around the desk. She trapped him against the edge, placing her hands on either side of his waist. Her tail wrapped around his thigh, a familiar grounding weight. "You look tired," she said, her voice dropping to a murmur. She reached up and touched the graying hair at his temples. "Long day," Adrian said, leaning into her touch. "The budget committee is more exhausting than a trench war." "Come," Arya said, pulling him gently. "Rhea is on duty tonight. The room is quiet." "Is it?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Or are there 3 students hiding under the bed again?" "I checked," Arya grinned. "I swept the perimeter. It is just us." They walked back to the warden's lodge, a small stone house on the edge of the cliff. It was separate from the main dormitories, offering a rare privacy. But as Adrian opened the door, he sighed. "You said you swept the perimeter." "I did," Arya said, sounding confused. On the rug in front of the fireplace, a small figure was curled up. It was a child, maybe 5 years old. She had human ears, but a small, jagged tail and tiny nubs of horns on her forehead. She was the daughter of 2 of the senior instructors, a human field medic and a demon engineer. She was fast asleep, clutching one of Adrian's spare boots, like a teddy bear. Adrian walked over and crouched down. The girl stirred. She opened one sleepy eye, saw Adrian, and immediately crawled forward. She flopped onto his prosthetic leg, resting her cheek against the metal. "My territory," she mumbled, drooling slightly. Adrian looked up at Arya. Arya was trying very hard not to laugh. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "This," Adrian said, gesturing to the child, "is your fault. You started this trend." "I established a precedent," Arya corrected, sitting down on the sofa. "She is just respecting tradition." Adrian shook his head, but he didn't move the girl. He sat down on the floor, leaning his back against the sofa. He carefully adjusted his leg so the kid would be more comfortable. "This is how the war ends," Adrian whispered to the ceiling. "Not with a treaty, not with a parade, but with a sore thigh and a ruined pair of boots." Arya reached down and ran her fingers through his hair. There are worse ways to end a war, my furniture. I am Warden, Adrian grumbled, closing his eyes. Respect my authority. Shh, Arya soothed. Sleep. And for a moment everything was perfect. But the universe, or perhaps fate, was not quite done with Adrian Cade. 2 weeks later, a royal shuttle descended onto the landing pad of the Academy. It bore the crest of the Queen. Serafina Nix stepped out. She looked older, her fire dimmed to a gentle ember, but she was still the Queen. She was accompanied by a retinue of shadow mages, their faces hidden behind obsidian masks. Adrian met her on the steps. Your Majesty, to what do we owe the honor is Varengar haunting the plumbing? Serafina smiled. Hello, Adrian. No, I am here for you. Me. There is a loose end, Serafina said. A question that has bothered my mages for 3 years. Why you? She gestured to the open door of the Academy, where dozens of demon children were playing. Why did the Shadow Link choose a human as its anchor? Why did my daughter, who trusts no one, sleep on your lap before she even knew your name? I have a calming personality, Adrian suggested. No, Serafina said. It is deeper than that. Come with us. We need to go to the Chamber of Echoes. The Chamber of Echoes was a natural cavern, deep beneath the Academy, a place where the acoustic and magical properties of the stone allowed one to walk through memories. Adrian stood in the center of the cavern. Arya stood beside him, holding his hand. Rhea stood at the door, guarding as always. The shadow mages began to chant. The air grew thick and heavy. We are going to walk back, Serafina's voice echoed. Back to the beginning, before the Academy, before the nursery, before the treaty. The world dissolved. Adrian gasped. The smell hit him first. Ozone. Burning rubber. Fear. He was back on the bridge of the Dauntless. He was looking at the holographic map. No, Adrian whispered. I don't want to see this. Look closer, Serafina's voice guided him. Not on the ship. Look at the target. The scene shifted. Adrian was no longer on the ship. He was a ghost floating down to the surface of Nereth, to Sector 7. He saw the bunkers. He saw the demon civilians huddled together. They were terrified, clutching their children. And then he saw her, an old demon woman, a matriarch. She was ancient, her scales gray, and cracked, her horns worn down to stumps. She was blind. She was kneeling in the center of the bunker, surrounded by weeping hatchlings. Above them, the sky was screaming. The Alliance cannons were charging. That is my grandmother, Arya whispered, her voice trembling. Matriarch Alara. She died in the fire. In the memory, the old woman raised her head. She didn't look at the roof. She looked up, through the stone, through the atmosphere, through the void of space. She looked right at Adrian. Or rather, she looked at the Adrian of the past, the man sitting in the command chair miles above her head. The old woman raised a trembling hand. Dark, purple energy swirled around her fingers. It wasn't combat magic. It was soul-weaving, the oldest and most dangerous form of demon sorcery. I see you, the old woman whispered. Her voice cut through the memory, clear as a bell. I see the one who hesitates. She pressed her hand to her own chest, pulling out a thread of silver light, her own life essence. The fire is coming, she intoned. But there is a spark that refuses to burn. I mark you human. I mark your heart. She cast the thread upwards. It vanished into the sky. When our children are born in the darkness, she whispered, tears leaking from her blind eyes. When they are lost and drowning in the noise, they will find you. They will find the silence. They will find the one who chose not to kill. The memory exploded in a flash of white light, the orbital bombardment impacting. Adrian stumbled back in the real world, gasping for air. He fell to his knees on the cold stone of the cavern. Silence. Arya was staring at him, her hand covering her mouth. Serafina looked solemn. She marked you, Seraphina said softly. A soul anchor. It is a desperate spell. She sacrificed her afterlife to create a beacon. Adrian looked at his hands. They were shaking. So it was a spell, all of it. The kids, Arya, they didn't trust me. They were programmed to find me. He felt a sudden crushing weight. The love, the loyalty, the naps was, it all, just a magical directive from a dead woman. I was just a homing beacon, Adrian laughed bitterly. I really am just a piece of furniture. A magical lamppost. No. Arya knelt in front of him. She grabbed his face between her hands, her claws digging in slightly, forcing him to look at her. The mark guided us, Arya said fiercely. It showed us where the safety was. It was a compass in the storm. That is why I slept on your lap that first day. My blood recognized the signal. She leaned closer, her golden eyes burning into his. But a compass only points the way, Adrian. It does not make you stay. She gestured to the memory of the bunker. My grandmother marked you because you hesitated, because you were good. The spell didn't make you good. It just recognized it. Seraphina stepped forward. Mark brought the children to your door, Adrian. But you could have kicked them out. You could have called the guards. You could have let them burn. Seraphina smiled, a rare, genuine warmth in her expression. You didn't. You fed them. You read to them. You jumped in front of a bullet for them. The spell didn't do that. You did. You were destined to be a chance, Adrian, Seraphina said. Nothing more. Whether you used that chance to save us was entirely your choice. Adrian looked at Arya. He saw the love in her eyes. It wasn't magical. It was messy, complicated, and real. He took a deep breath. The shadow link in his head hummed. It wasn't a foreign noise anymore. It was his noise. I guess, Adrian whispered, I can live with being given a chance. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange, the colors of Nereth and Earth mixing together. Adrian sat on the stone steps of the academy entrance. It was his favorite spot to watch the sunset. Behind him, the sounds of the academy were winding down. The day students were heading to the shuttles. The boarding students were heading to the dorms. Arya came out and sat beside him. She didn't say anything. She just leaned her head on his shoulder. Rhea Tal stood a few feet away, leaning against a pillar, cleaning her fingernails with a dagger. She gave Adrian a nod, the highest form of affection she was capable of. On the lawn below, a group of students were playing a game. It was a mix of soccer and capture the flag, involving a gravity ball and a lot of tackling. Kale was there laughing as he dodged a human defender. Iron was there playing goalie. Sarah was shouting instructions from the sideline. A small figure climbed up the steps. It was the little hybrid girl from before. She was clutching a blanket. She walked right up to Adrian. She didn't ask. She simply climbed into his lap, curled up into a ball, and pulled the blanket over her head. Claimed, came the muffled voice from under the fabric. Arya chuckled, wrapping her arm around Adrian's waist. You are trapped, Warden. Adrian looked down at the lump on his lap. He looked at the woman he loved. He looked at the terrifying bodyguard who was secretly dating the logistics captain. He looked at the school, built on the ashes of a massacre he had tried to stop. The shadow link whispered in his mind. It wasn't the screaming of dying civilians anymore. It was the sleepy murmurs of children. It was the feeling of safety. Adrian closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the stone pillar. You know, Adrian said softly, the vibrations of his voice soothing the child on his lap. I spent my whole life trying to be a great strategist, trying to draw the perfect map, trying to win the war. He felt the rhythmic breathing of the girl. He felt Arya's hand in his. But if after everything, Adrian smiled a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his tired eyes. If my only purpose in this universe is to be the place where people feel safe enough to close their eyes, then that is enough. It is more than enough, Arya whispered, kissing his cheek. It is everything. The sun vanished behind the mountains. The twin moons of Nerith rose, casting a silver-blue light over the world. The war was over. The paperwork was endless. The budget committee was a nightmare. But on the steps of the Twin Flame Academy, surrounded by monsters who had learned to love, and humans who had learned to trust Adrian Cade, the janitor, the traitor, the hero, the furniture finally truly went to sleep.